Please welcome to the stage Dr. Benjamin Bishop, Ms. Stacy Bostjanick, Mr. John Garstka, and Dr. Forrest Shull.
Yes, good afternoon. Please, take a seat. I am happy to report that we are starting 10 minutes late because you were all out networking and spending time with around the posters, which is great. That's the whole idea of what we're here. And one of the reasons that we're also here is to say, how do we take those conversations that you were just having and getting them out to the DOD? And I'm really happy to be moderating this panel that's going to talk about how do we get this technology into the hands of our warfighter. What does that broad adoption look like? And what is the DOD, the bureaucracy, what's its role in helping enable that adoption? So before we get into the conversation, I thought I might just kind of review. We're getting towards the end of the day, so what have we done? And if you remember, we started the day with a video of a future that is not a good future, but it is plausible. And that future becomes reality is if we, in this room, are content with the status quo, are content with that shared helplessness model that Kathleen was talking about. And that future looks like what Rob McHenry was talking about in his opening statements. That's the future where we lose on day one. Fortunately, since the beginning of the day, we've talked about we have tools at our disposal. We have formal methods, tools, functions. We've heard about good news stories about corporations like Amazon with Mike's great talk about a large tech company taking these techniques and putting them into action. We've also heard about pockets of DoD innovation that are using this. So what I'd like to show is a different video of a different future where we do take action. So let's go ahead and roll the film.
Tensions were high last month as China postured around Taiwan, but a silent battle was already raging, a battle in cyberspace. For years, Chinese hackers had probed U.S. military and critical infrastructure networks, looking for weaknesses. By crippling those systems, they aimed to create a window of opportunity to reclaim Taiwan without opposition. But with their forces in place, when time came to launch their cyber offensive, nothing happened.
We knew the old ways weren't enough. We needed a game changer.
A new approach to software security had been gaining momentum within the Defense Department: formal methods. This wasn't just about patching a vulnerability after it was found. It was about creating systems that were inherently, provably secure. Behind the scenes, the department had worked alongside industry partners, using formal methods tools to safeguard essential systems, both modern and legacy.
We slashed upgrade times by over 85%. We could push out critical updates in hours, not weeks, even as adversaries actively attempted to disrupt our systems.
Because of this new approach, U.S. forces protecting Taiwan and critical infrastructure throughout the U.S. were resilient to the efforts of PLA hackers, and the Chinese advance on Taiwan was halted before it even started. This situation serves as a stark reminder: the future of national security hinges on software security.
All right, so I think that's a great segue into our conversation, and I want to start with gratitude. Stacy, John, Forrest, thank you for joining us here today and for being part of this conversation. I think I'll go out on a limb and say we all agree this is the kind of future we want to enable and work together to realize. So let's just dive into it. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm really interested in hearing from you. You all represent a different part of the DoD ecosystem. So from your perspective and your organization, what interests you about formal methods, and do you think the DoD is ready to adopt it at scale? And if not, where do you see that might be potential barriers? So, Forrest, we've been talking about formal methods for, I think well over a year. So maybe we can start with you and your thoughts.
Absolutely. So I sit within USD R&E, which means I report up to the CTO for the Defense Department. One of my jobs there is to maintain the roadmap of where we're going in terms of our science and technology investments and our R&D investments for advanced computing and software. Where we're trying to go, of course, is the easy part, because we have that demand signal from Congress, from the Pentagon seniors, that we need to go faster. We need to make sure that we're doing iterative drops of capability and not taking years and years to get new capabilities out. That's not the pace at which the warfight's going to happen, not today and not in the future for sure. One of the reasons I really got interested in the DARPA formal methods portfolio is I see these technologies as one of the major enablers for everything else in the portfolio that I track. Clearly, when we talk about software capabilities, we know it's everywhere. We know we need to go fast. We want to go fast. But the adversary cyber capabilities are one of the major limiting factors for what we're able to do. We can't go so fast that we open ourselves up to risk that we don't want to take. We can't go so fast that we're cutting corners. And looking at something like formal methods where we might be able to finally get beyond some of the whack-a-mole approaches to kind of knocking down one vulnerability only to find the next one, really, I think, enables us to take a look at what we're trying to do with the larger portfolio and enable some of those other technologies to really come into play and make a difference at large.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like getting away from the whack-a-mole, cycle and that, learned helplessness, and being able to get not only the security but the agility. We were talking about some of that in some of our presentations earlier. So I think actually that's a great segue to you, John, from your perspective in acquisitions and sustainment. What are your thoughts on formal methods, and then also kind of the barriers to adoption, especially from a policy perspective?
Oh, thanks for the question. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Let's see, can we bring up the slide? There we go. Actually, there should be. I have a version that says cleared for public release. Mm-hmm. But so to sort of put the importance of what we're talking about here in context, if you're upgrading a system or you're building a new system and you're responding to the cyber survivability endorsement of the system survivability KPP, there's these 4 different attributes: prevent, mitigate, recover, and adapt. And from my perspective, formal methods is a very powerful approach to get to assured software. But if you're a program manager, you have to do it in the context of doing all these other things. And maybe if you do formal methods, then you can make some of those other things cost less. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, so to me, when I think about formal methods and I think about the conversations that have happened today, this is a diagram that Rand helped me put together on the economics of cybersecurity. And if you think about like the chemistry problem we're trying to solve here, if you don't have enough of the right stuff, you don't get the reaction you're hoping for. So we've got people in the audience who understand the capabilities. You need expertise to employ these capabilities. You want to improve whatever your cybersecurity posture is to a security target that you can define, and you need resources to do that. So from me, one of the most important things that I hope to get out of the capstone exercises that DARPA is doing is how much does it cost? Like how much does it cost to do a block upgrade to a weapon system based on lines of code and complexity? Like what are those cost estimates? Because if you're a program manager, like you need to be able to say, I want to hit a definable security target, and this is how much I think it's going to cost, and then you've got to go advocate for those resources. So to me, it's super important that we understand that's the equation we need to balance.
Yeah, John, I couldn't agree more. And I think from my perspective and my experience, working, in government and in the Air Force and operational test environment, it's really difficult to overstate the importance of being able to understand the technology, be able to cost it, and be able to create understand the economics. And I'll go back to Rob McHenry's, one of his remarks, and just remind everyone that's why we're here, is to jumpstart a new market for formal methods. And so we have the industry aspects, we have the expertise in industry, we have the understanding in government, and then also in the acquisition world, like people like Orrin Edwards, so he can actually think about how to put these into action. So I think that's a great theme for us to remember. And it's actually a great way to, kind of segue into, Stacy, your thoughts, from your perspective, as you see it from a different lens,
Right.
within the Department of Defense.
So yeah, from our perspective, John's group is more focused on what it does to a weapon system, right? But the software that we're looking at is more applicable to being installed in our systems and what have you. And I know that from a software perspective from the DIB, there's a lot of complaints that it takes so long to get ATO'd, and the ATO process is just unbearable. And so one of the things that we've recognized and we're looking at is how to expedite and make it easier for the process to embrace some of these things. Now, undoubtedly, we have to ensure that the software that we utilize is secure and that we're not introducing vulnerabilities into the system when we bring software in. So we recently issued 3 RFIs for the SWIFT program. And I can't see you guys too much out there because of the bright lights, but I'd like to see how many people of you have heard of the SWIFT program? They're all asleep. Oh, a couple. All right. So did any of you respond to the RFIs? 1, okay. So we put out 3 RFIs. 1 was for a third-party SBOM capability. 1 was for third-party assessment of those SBOMs, and then 1 was for an AI tool that could evaluate the body of evidence we would receive. And the thought process is that today, we take your software, we do all that on the backside and have to go through our processes and procedures to bring it in to be able to ATO it. By having the contractors or the DIB step up and voluntarily, if you so desire, to expedite the adoption of your software, you go get that third-party SBOM, you go get that third-party assessment of that SBOM, and bring that body of evidence to the department, and we will run it through a couple of things: the AI tool to assess the body of evidence that we'd received, and also we will assess it against what information we might have already within the department about that software to be able to expedite the adoption. Now, once it goes through that process, that information will be brought into an instantiation of the EMAS database so that the services can discover it and understand what it'll take to have it brought into their systems and onto their systems. And then the supplier performance risk system, SPRS, right now is where we think we'll have those softwares listed so they'll be discoverable by the services so they can go out and say, oh, look, this software's already been approved, it's already been ATO'd. As long as it's compatible with my systems, I can ingest it and I can buy it, and we're hoping that it'll cut the time frame in half. This fall, we'll probably be running a couple of pilots to validate our thesis, so we'll see. But I thank the one guy that responded to my RFI.
I will say that that is great news, and maybe if I can just reiterate for the crowd, especially for those that maybe don't have blue lanyards, is what you're hearing is the Department of Defense is very interested in upgrading our ATO process.
Expediting it.
Expediting.
We've heard the complaints, 1 or 2, about how long it takes.
So, which is, again, pulls all, our discussions today together. And there's, again, reasons for hope for those of you that maybe have experience working in government and that dismay. We have leaders here that are really embracing this vision and charting the way forward. So speaking of charting the way forward, Forrest, maybe we come back to you and think through from an engineering and research lens. How is R&E looking at the future and really supporting both the foundational research to create the new breakthroughs in software security, and also supporting the operational transition of these technologies? So,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of what we do, of course, is track the investments that we're making across the portfolio. So I know we have a lot of research in this area going on here at DARPA, obviously, that you've heard about today, in the FFRDCs and the service labs. And I think one of the consistent threads that I find when I look at where we've made these investments so far is that each one comes with a success story. I think there's been kind of by and large a body of knowledge that says we've been able to work with programs, we've been able to do realistic things with the formal methods, we've been able to have that impact. But it's always been, to date at least, I think kind of the onesie-twosies, that there's a real in-depth involvement from the researchers, they're there with the program. I think we have enough to say that there's something here, that this is worth our while to see what we can do to get this out more broadly at scale. And that's, to my mind, the real challenge for the department now, is how we think about taking this body of work and now starting to make it a little bit more regimented maybe, but a bit more tool-assisted. What can we do to make this easier for programs at large to start to adopt across the board? We know vulnerabilities are going to be a killer for us in almost every program that we have, right? We know that it's not that these are little corners of the department where we need better cyber resilience or cyber robustness, but this is across the board. One of the things that we've done in R&E, of course, is to first make those investments. Secondly, do the community building. So we have our communities of interest, we have the communities of practice where we try to match up some of the researchers with the programs and get them talking so that we're speaking the same language and we know what we're after. But also thirdly, I think also trying to just, where we can, start to make that direction, right? I think that it's a lot of interesting research to be done in this area, and we don't want that not to happen, of course. But when I look at what DARPA's done as an exemplar here, I really think we need to build on that model of what is it that the research community can do to help make this easier to transition, to embed some of this in tools, to start to, instead of having this body of all this spectrum of all these different formal methods out there, all of which seem like good ideas, right, in some context or another. But how do we start to get to a common vocabulary where we can talk with our friends in ANS and the CIO's office about where some of those techniques might be better suited for the goals that we're trying to get after at large, right? And also make sure that we're able to talk about some of the easy insertion points, some of the low-hanging fruit where we can start to get started small, do things that are relatively self-contained and maybe a bit more affordable, and of course build on that and continue to ratchet things up over time, but at least start to recognize that there are some of those smaller opportunities where we can do things that are scoped appropriately and start to have an impact without expecting everyone to have a body of, a cadre of PhDs out there to do all the hard thinking for us, right?
Yeah, I can't thank you enough for your role in helping to establish those communities. And that's really one of the themes that we've been talking about all day is how do we establish the partnerships? And this colloquium is one of those efforts. But really, how do we scale that that connectivity across the ecosystem of government, industry, and academia? It's really exciting. And like you mentioned, the success stories and be able to get those early wins and those first downs, to use a football analogy, and then actually translate those to, okay, what are the low-hanging fruit that other organizations can go after? And I think that's a great kind of lead into, John, coming back to you, your role in ANS. Could you perhaps maybe provide some insight into your role of the capstones that DARPA is working with partners on, and the role of capturing lessons learned and best practices guides, or some thoughts from that perspective, so it makes it easy for other organizations to go after that low-hanging fruit and get that first win?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. So let me answer it in a roundabout way. So we're talking about warfighting capabilities, and if you think about one of the most significant things that DARPA did in the past is they figured out this technology called stealth. And it turns out that if you want to make an aircraft, if you want to leverage that technology to build an aircraft, you've got to think real hard about it, and it is not a resource-neutral activity. Okay, and that's the way that I would think about this. This is as important, from my perspective, cyber resiliency is as important as stealth in this period of conflict, this period of competition. I mean, cyberspace is a fifth domain of conflict. If you have resilient systems, you have a warfighting advantage that's analogous to stealth. So we have to think about it like that. You just don't show up and say, you don't take a fourth-gen platform and make it stealthy. You can add some things to it, but we have an opportunity with formal methods to do a cyber survivability block upgrade. We do block upgrades on our weapon systems all the time. What we're doing in the capstone projects is we're doing cyber survivability block upgrades. And so I want to understand, how much does it cost? As I alluded to, what are if you want to go put together a cost estimate for doing, of cyber survivability block upgrade, you kind of need to know how many lines of code are we talking about. Are you going to do everything, or are you going to focus on the mission computer that's key to safety of flight? You have to kind of know how long it's going to take, what kind of, can you do this with entry-level computer scientists with the right tools, or, what's sort of your labor classification? And then you need to understand how to ask for it. If I'm putting out an RFP and I want the performers to meet the standard of what we call formal methods, how do I ask for that in a way that everybody understands what I'm asking for? So those are the kinds of things that I want to get out of the best practices guide. And I think that will really help accelerate the implementation by, I don't think the issue is people don't want this. They don't know how much it's going to cost. And without being able to figure out how to ask for it and quantify how much it's going to get, how much it's going to cost to get to that goal, like you can't do effective system acquisition.
So again, strong concur on your points, John. Just a couple of thoughts that I had as you were talking is, first of all, cybersecurity is as important as stealth. So as a former F-35 pilot, that's one of the things when we were testing F-35, we thought we would go out and test in a contested air environment, and I was very confident in being able to succeed. But I was very concerned about the cyber environment and thinking differently about how we look at our readiness, as we heard earlier this morning. It's all linking this back to readiness and capability for a warfighter is what we look at across DOD. And as you think about how do you translate that into how we communicate with industry, government to industry, and your points, I think again difficult to overstate the importance of how do we articulate that requirement, that need.
Yeah. So let me just put an exclamation point in my comments in response to what you're saying. The warfighter presented a clear demand signal for capabilities that were stealth-enabled, all right? We have to do the same thing. The warfighters have to say they want this, and they have to be willing to pay for it.
Yeah.
And if we meet those two boundary conditions, based on all the amazing work that DARPA has done, we'll be able to get there, but we have to treat it like a warfighting capability.
Yeah. And I'm really excited about the conversations, again, that were happening, today, and be able to, translate that into not only a requirement, but I also think about it, when you go from technology to capability, there's other areas. You have that, how do you contract for it? How do you communicate to industry? But also, how do you train people to use these technologies? So, Stacy, I know that's part of your, role. I mean, any thoughts on, as we broaden out and look at adoption?
Well, so I mean, from adopting these kinds of capabilities, we do have training programs. The CIO right now is really working to come up with a cyber workforce criteria and curriculum, right? Because what we do find is that we are at a deficit. We don't have the necessary people out in industry today to provide those capabilities, and it's sorely needed, right? If you look at the number of cyber events and incidences that we see daily from both the government side and the industry side, it's staggering when you figure most of the industry partners don't know that they've been hacked until somebody from FBI knocks on their door and tells them, right? We have a real deficit of people reporting their cyber incidences. So, we definitely need to work hard to up our game from an industry perspective to have cyber individuals in the spaces, to be trained and have enough that companies can have the ability to hire them and have them in their spaces, right? And, from our perspective, conveying the requirements to industry, we've leveraged NIST heavily to make sure that the standards and capabilities that they set forth is what we try to pivot from so that we are consistent across the federal government. So you don't have NASA asking for one thing and DOD asking for another. We're trying to make sure that we standardize. I happen to be the one that's in charge of the CMMC program, which is requesting companies who handle our CUI meet a certain standard and level of cybersecurity to be able to protect the confidentiality of that. As we move forward into integrity and availability, which is one of the things that John is very focused on, making sure that our data and information is protected as well as our software, right? Because each and every time we don't protect and have security as a paramount foundation for what we're doing, we introduce vulnerability and we put kids' lives at stake. I'm old enough that I have kids that are old enough to be in the military, and I don't want them to be out in harm's way. I want them to be able to push that button and know what's going to happen, that's supposed to happen is going to happen, right? And I also don't want them to be in an armed conflict with somebody where they're in the exact same weapon system. Right? I want my kid to have the superior capability, and we need to focus on that as a nation and make sure that we're protecting and eradicating vulnerabilities so that when we put our men and women in harm's way, they have the best chance to come home.
Yes, the sons and daughters of America deserve nothing less.
I need somebody to take care of me when I'm old, right?
Do I.
My son says he's going to pay somebody, but
Well, it's interesting as you look at the children of America, and I have 4 children. One's in high school,
you have a lot
in
of people
college.
to take
Yes,
care of you.
I got a 4-ship as
I didn't
as
do
we'd
that
say.
well.
So I got some redundancy there. But it's interesting talking about career paths, and you mentioned like the training program and access to the workforce, and a lot of this goes to our academic partners that are here in the room, and thinking about how do we get formal methods not only out to industry but also out to academia and to that workforce supplier, right? In order to be able to graduate, young men and women with these skill sets, built in. So it's been really exciting to see that. Those conversations, develop, and our DARPA program managers and performers are helping to create that ecosystem to realize that. The other interesting thing that you mentioned is standards and NIST standards, and we were actually talking about that in the back. It was a great conversation that's continuing on stage here. But really, in a lot of ways, that's the ultimate goal that we're all pursuing: is how do we establish new standards, for software security? And I got to reference my notes because Rob and Henry mentioned how do we end the era of software vulnerabilities, and are there new standards that can make that happen? And then how do we articulate those standards and create that?
I think it's a really good point, and I think that if you think about sort of the intersection of A&S and CIO and our respective equities, if they're key, like IT capabilities, like routers or cybersecurity software that we buy, if industry would employ formal methods so that we know that if there are vulnerabilities in those systems that they're super hard to find, like that's just as important, because in many cases you can't build a next generation NC3 capability without commercial routers.
Yeah.
And if we can say, all right, objective requirement is these commercial routers, meet this standard, then you're in this situation of like where we used to be when we had standards. But if this is something that we clearly are willing to pay for, then because we can identify what this measure of software quality is, then I think that it's a really powerful opportunity.
Right.
Yep.
We need standards, but we don't want to go back to mil-spec.
Yep, that's right. So how do you create that environment and have the constant evaluation? So we're getting short on time, so I wanted to do one more question. So we'll consider this a lightning round, if you will, and really interested in your advice to the audience, and how the attendees here today and their organizations can support what you are doing in order to realize this new future, and what kind of partnerships are most important. So Forrest, do you want to lead something?
Great, absolutely. First off, I think there's a lot of work to go around. I mean, I think that we need this technology. I don't think it's quite there yet where it's easy for us to consume it. So 2 things at the top of my mind. First off, I've always been a researcher. Some of my best friends are formal Methodists. I know there's a certain fascination in continuing to model more and more aspects, more and more higher fidelity. Like I said, that's good, but we also need the research that goes into how do we make this more accessible? How do we lower those costs to entry? How do we start to bring in tools and automation and AI to make a lot of this, things that are easier for us to consume on the program side? So that's one for the researchers. The other, from an industry point of view, like John has said, we need that discussion about cost, right? I think the department understands that there's a priority, a premium that we would be willing to pay for higher robust software, for more resilience. We know that this is critical for us right now. If there's a price tag attached, let's at least figure that out and have that discussion, because it's not out of the realm of possibility that we'd be interested in going after it. And so but we need that discussion. We need industry to partner up the innovators that are doing this kind of work with the folks that know how to work with the department and come to us and have that conversation and let us know what we can do to help.
John?
Yeah, cost and performance. We need to be able to understand that relationship, and it may be that if you build software with formal methods, that the life cycle cost of the software goes down because you know what it's actually doing. So I'll leave it with that.
Well, we all are taxpayers, and all the money that we pay comes from your tax dollars. So, I think we need to be very careful that we have a good balance, but, at the end of the day, I'm willing to pay extra to make sure those men and women have what they need in their hands to come out victorious and come home.
Yeah. And again, our sons and daughters expect nothing else, nothing less. And what's really exciting, as we've been talking about through the day, is it could be a yes and, right? So, John, as you're mentioning, by investing in this type of technologies, you may face some upfront costs, but if it doesn't take a year to get an ATO, approved, we can get cost savings like you were alluding to, and it really changes the paradigm and changes that. So that is the future that we have in front of us. And again, like we've been talking about all day, everyone in this room and your organizations and your connections have agency here, and we're really excited. Please to continue this conversation. If you have questions for us, please pull us aside and continue the conversations that are ongoing today, and really help us realize this future and make formal methods part of our new standards for software security. So let's please join me in a round of applause, and thanks for our panelists.
Thank you.